Have you watched Game of Thrones, read Lord of the Rings, attended a medieval Renaissance fair, or seen a Pre-Raphaelite painting at the National Gallery in London? Or perhaps you live in Sydney and have visited St. Mary's Cathedral in the city. Chances are you are of great interest to a discipline called medievalism. This is the academic study of how post-medieval individuals and groups portray and think about the Middle Ages. This field, which is very dynamic, brings together literary scholars, musicologists, historians, theologians, art theorists, philosophers, archaeologists, sociologists, and religious scholars, together to better understand both modernity and the Middle Ages. In this video, you'll learn what medievalism is, how it exists, and why it matters. I'm Madeleine Rose-Jones, and I study history, literature, and culture. Welcome to Snowy Fictions. Beyond the definition of medievalism provided, it's vital to consider the approaches, attitudes, and methods used by medievalists. For one, the act of medievalism is framed as a belief and practice that manifests in modern culture through architecture, video games, fashion, literature, and even journalism. Think Gothic Revival architecture, Assassin's Creed, A Song of Ice and Fire, and the interesting journalism from British writers like Ed West and Tom Holland. Here, you'll see a keen awareness about pop culture, as medievalism is invested in how humans communicate and express themselves. However, medievalism shouldn't be mistaken for anthropology. Rather, medievalism analyzes how the Middle Ages are portrayed today and what it says about the past and ourselves. For example, the philosophical movement Romanticism is studied through these lenses, with scholars taking note of novels such as The Castle of Otranto and the wonderful music of Richard Wagner. A medievalist will also consider the modern circumstances which led to a fascination of the Middle Ages held by so many. The possibilities, of course, are endless. Note the difference with other medievalisms, however. There's a difference between a scholar who studies the Middle Ages, that is the period vaguely between the 5th century AD to the 16th, and to the scholars who analyse the modern depictions of the Middle Ages, usually concentrated from the 19th to 21st centuries. Both are, of course, different to those producing films, music, video games, books, and buildings with medieval motifs, themes, and topics. For this stage, think about George R.R. Martin or the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, as these are artists and creators who are not academics. It's all confusing, of course, but there are two Anglosphere individuals who manage to be all three types of medievalists. And obviously they are J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. They produced scholarship about medieval literature and language, whilst also commenting on fairy tales and folklore from the 19th century, whilst also writing Lord of the Rings and Narnia, respectively. Another example, whose books I highly recommend, is the Italian novelist and academic Umberto Eco, whose novel The Name of the Rose is a wonderful, terrific example of medieval mystery. Of course, being an academic field, the study of medievalism has taken on numerous trends found in medieval history and literary departments. One such example is the global Middle Ages, which shifts the perspective of medieval history and culture away from the Latin West to a more global and therefore inclusive view, covering areas from Eastern Europe, South Asia, to even Oceania, where I live. Medievalism has recently incorporated this trend, with many scholars, such as Louise Diakins from Macquarie University, viewing medievalism in modernity as a global occurrence. Likewise, many medievalists have been outspoken at the so-called appropriation and misuse of the Middle Ages, which, according to them, right-wingers and conservatives are misinterpreting and misapplying medieval themes and images to their activism. Whether this is fair or unfair, I'll leave you to decide. But I'll share my opinion. To me, there is a serious danger of political bias in such studies and a lack of outreach and debate with actual right-wingers. In addition to the reliance on secondary sources from mainstream and government media organisations, which depicts those on the right rather poorly. To put it simply, I don't think highly of these academics who claim the right wing and conservatives are misusing the Middle Ages. Yet, there are other concerns I have. Another is the medievalist discipline is their approach to media. So often, the medieval aspects of a movie, fantasy series, or video game are treated as foreign and distinct from other time periods that may have inspired the story. For example, the Harry Potter series takes significant inspiration from the Middle Ages. I have made several videos about this. However, that's not the only time period on display, as we can notice cues from antiquity, Tudor England, and the Victorian period across the British Isles. The films also took stylish cues from the Soviet Union, the Byzantine Empire, ancient Greece, and Rome, Imperial Russia, Renaissance France, and pre-World War I, Western Europe. This texture produced the wizarding world we know today, and perhaps simplifying it to a medievalist text reduces its richness and limits our scope for further discussion and inquiry. Yet, despite these problems, and I've mentioned a few, medievalism matters, and I have high hopes for its future. I encourage everyone to learn about the Middle Ages and to take a careful look in their own lives and cultures and consider how medieval ideas and motifs are represented. As individuals, we should not see ourselves as sentient beings who lack culture, history, and purpose. By rediscovering the Middle Ages, we too can sparkle some of its magic into our own lives. What are your thoughts on medievalism? Do you have a favourite medieval fantasy or story? Comment below with your thoughts and ideas. I would love to read them and start a wider discussion. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like, subscribe as I make videos about history, literature, and culture. I'll see you soon. Thanks again.